Hello, my name is Dominic DeMaria. I am a agent with Porcupine Real Estate based out of New Hampshire, and we are here today to discuss some homesteading in New Hampshire. I am joined by Travis Corcoran, author of Escape the City. It's a book. Actually, Travis, why don't you tell us about the book?
Sure. So I'll approach it from another angle. I've lived in New Hampshire for about 10 years now, and I actually bought my farm through Porcupine Real Estate about 9.5 or 9.75 quarters years ago. And one of the reasons we're looking for a farm is that my wife and I wanted to do homesteading. We'd both been interested in this more or less all of our lives, starting with reading the Foxfire books back in the 70s and 80s. And so we had a lot of information, sort of intellectual or academic information on homesteading, but this was the first time that we were sort of really jumping into it. So like I said, that started 9.5 years ago. And after about 8 or so years in, realized that I just had, huge amounts of notes in wikis and documents and all sorts of stuff on sort of every single decision I'd made along the way. What types of fencing are available for livestock? The farm store explained to me what the difference between hay and straw is, and go on and on and on, and replacement parts and how to diagnose a tractor that won't start in cold weather, and how to log a tree, and how to raise livestock and do butchering and make bacon and all this other stuff. So I'd written some other books before, so I decided to start making this into a book. So that's basically Escape the City, volumes 1 and 2.
Great. And so and this is kind of a broad question, but what does homesteading mean to you?
Sure. So that's actually something I talk about in chapter 1. There's a lot of different phrases that get kicked around. There's homesteading and farming and gardening. And for each of these phrases, there's multiple definitions. So, one person's definition of a term might not be the same as someone else's. One point I make is there's a lot of different things in the homesteading space that might work for different people. And so if you've got one guy who's, on Twitter or YouTube or something, and, he's saying, homesteading means 50 head of cattle and 100 acres, and, this sort of stuff. And then someone else is on Instagram and they say, homesteading is raising strawberries so you can make this, beautiful pie and put it on Instagram. Those are both choices. And, it's not for me to say, what's right or wrong. For any of those choices, there's a lot of overlapping information. Both of those people might be interested in gardening. Both of those people might be interested in soil health. One of them is interested in diesel tractor maintenance and one is not. Perhaps both of them are interested in recipes for stuff, recipes and food preservation from a garden in the countryside. There's a lot of different things that people might want to do, and a lot of the information overlaps, and, people can decide what's right for them.
Did you consider yourself a homesteader before moving to New Hampshire?
I considered myself interested in homesteading. I lived on a 1/10 of an acre lot back then. And so at this point, my pig run is here in New Hampshire is bigger than my entire yard was back in Massachusetts. Perfectly timed. So I was not a homesteader then, but I would say that I'm a homesteader now.
Great. And what initially attracted you to it? What about the homesteader lifestyle?
Sure. I've always been interested in sort of doing things for myself and not having to be reliant on other people. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is sort of ideological, one is pragmatic. But I just like digging deep into topics and really understanding them all. So I don't want to, just go to a garage and the mechanic says, your foo bar is on the fritz. I replaced it with a new nod along. Oh yeah, okay, foo bar, great. Glad to hear that. Now, I certainly do, take a car to the mechanic. It's not that I have to do absolutely everything, but I like touching things enough to really have a fair idea of what's going on. And so that's part of it. And then also having the pictures of the pigs and other livestock on the screen. Another part of it is that my wife and I are both interested in sort of ethical food production. And that's a phrase that, some people on the far left can get behind and some people on the far right can get behind. Kind of interesting with horseshoe theory these days. Raising food that, we know where it's been, and, raising animals that are very well cared for and well treated and get to live outside, not in giant warehouses, is important to us.
And what do you, so other than like the food that you produce and the meat that you produce, what do you get out of the whole homesteading experience?
Right. I would say that a lot of it is the lifestyle and sort of the ideological satisfaction. Um, there was, and you know, one thing I always make clear to people is that the specialization in a capitalist economy is a great thing. You are never going to produce your own clothes cheaper than you are going to buy a T-shirt from Amazon. You are never going to heat your own house, you know, cheaper in a sense of, you know, absolute units of labor, cheaper with firewood than you are by, you know, just tapping into a network of, you know, utilities. But there is a lot of satisfaction in being sort of deeply and broadly competent. So when you have a tree that is, you know, a dead tree leaning over a pasture, when you can go out, you can cut it down yourself. If it gets hung up in other trees, you can rig it appropriately with a steel cable and pulleys, pull it down, limb it, maybe feed the limbs into a wood chipper and use that in your garden, or, you know, bring it to a burn pile, then take the log, haul it back to your firewood area with your tractor, cross cut it, split it, stack it. There's, you know, if people on Twitter sometimes talk about, you know, sort of urban bug men and, you know, living in the pod and eating the bugs, and living out on a homestead and doing a lot of stuff for yourself is just intensely satisfying. So, you know, it is more expensive to cut down a tree and heat with wood than it is to, you know, work an extra hour at work and take that money and use it. But it's a much better lifestyle for me, at least.
And how much of your day would you say you spend dedicated to homesteading?
Great. I would say that weekdays, probably an hour a day, and that's by choice. I could certainly do less. I enjoy my job, but there's declining marginal utility in working at a desk. So I actively look for opportunities to get out and get on the tractor or grab a shovel or something in the morning before work. And then most weekend days, I would say that in season, probably, and by in season, I mean sort of the 8 or 9 months of the year where it's not frozen solid, probably 4 hours on Saturday and 4 hours on Sunday. You know, there are some days where it's raining and you're burned out, and so you spend absolutely zero. There are other days when you're really just itching to get out there in the beautiful spring or summer weather and want to do, you know, an 8 hour day. So that's for me. And so I guess what that adds up to is on the order of 13 hours a week. There are other people. I think they're probably guests for an upcoming episode. The couple at Bardo Farm, and I think that he has a full-time job and then also treats homesteading as his second full-time job. So you know, my number is 13 hours a week, and I think his number might be more like 35 hours a week.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's different when you're making a living off of it and not just providing yourself. So
Right.
for sure, for sure. And then, how much planning did you do prior to actually pulling the trigger and starting the
Great.
homestead?
That's another topic I talk about in an early chapter of the book, sort of, you know, a 5 year countdown, a 3 year countdown, a 1 year countdown. And it wasn't sort of explicit planning, but one thing that worked well for me is that I'd always been handy and had been accumulating tools and accumulating experience. So, you know, when we landed on the homestead, not only did I already have a MIG welder and a bunch of metalworking equipment, but I knew how to use it, you know, table saw and fully equipped shop and all this other stuff. And so for someone who is not yet on a homestead, and you know, living in the country doesn't necessarily mean that you need to learn to weld. But if you want to, you know, do this sort of thing, you're gonna break the bucket on your tractor sooner or later, and you'll probably want to learn to weld. And so if someone is not in a position to pull the trigger immediately, and they know, oh, I'm gonna have to save for 3 or 4 or 5 years to get the down payment, there's a lot of useful stuff that you can do in that time. But as far as sort of what is necessary, I would say that probably a year to a year and a half before you expect to land is when you really want to start the process. You know, you're in real estate, so you certainly know that there's a lot more supply and a lot to choose from if you're looking for, say, a condo in Manchester. Whereas if you're looking for a farm and you've got a bunch of specifications, you want to have, you know, a running stream on it, you want to have at least 10, but no more than 50 acres. It should have a barn, it should have this, it should have that. That is a much more thinly traded sort of things. So you can't just say, okay, I'm ready to move in September. It's June 1st. Let me start looking. It might take you noticeably longer than that to find the thing you're looking for.
Sure. And it's not like you can move your farm to someplace else.
Right.
Once you lock into it, you want to kind of stay there because you're establishing everything.
Absolutely. And, once you've planted your orchard, which is going to take, 3 or 5 years until you get, the first peach off of it. And then, in year 3, you're thrilled you've got a peach. And in year, 5 or 7, you're thrilled because you've got bushels of peaches. It's not like having a condo in the city where you say, oh, I'm in the north end and I'd actually rather be in the south end. And, you can just pay your, 5 or 6% commission and hire movers and, start over trivially. So it is a bit of a commitment. And that's another thing I talk about. If you've got, years ahead of you, one thing to start doing is, drive all over New Hampshire, stop in lots of places, see where there's, little bookstores or farmers markets, get a feel for the various communities.
Yeah, and I always recommend to people too, like you can start small. You don't have to start out by buying a farm. It's odd, actually, that many of the people who I've talked to say they did just that. Like they were like, I'm going to buy a piece of property, I'm going to start. And it's like, well, okay, that's not the right choice for everybody. But
Right.
Some people, and it does work for some people, but you can start small by just, canning some veggies or,
Yep.
making jams or any number of things. So
Yeah. And, I started, like I said, with a bunch of sort of hobbies of welding and woodworking and everything back when I was living in, the dense suburbs. And I also started doing stuff like making bacon. So I would go to the butcher and I would get a 10-pound pork belly. And, that's a lot for doing in the suburbs, but it's not impossible. You can do stuff like that. So the more you prepare, and maybe you can have 5 chickens in the suburbs. Maybe you can start doing food preservation to try your hand at it, and that'll tell you, hey, when I am ready to move, do I want to look for a place with 50 acres and a barn that has enough stalls to hold all pigs and chickens and cows and turkeys, sheep, or is that not really for me? Having tried my hand at making bacon, have I thought, oh, that's fun, but really I just want a small garden, in which case, maybe 2 or 3 acres is all you want.
yeah. And then I guess the last thing we can kind of just touch on real quick is, and what if you could tell someone who is considering homesteading as something that they would like to do, if you could look back on what you did in your process, is there one thing or 2 things maybe quickly that we can kind of just say, okay, avoid this or do this first?
Right. That is a good question, and I'm not using this just as an opportunity to plug my book, but I will plug the book just because it's a huge topic that I could talk about for hours and hours. Um, Thank you. Go to Amazon and search for "Escape the City." So there's a lot of places where I sort of learned things the hard way and maybe invested money in tools or amenities that were not the highest return on investment for me. There were a few that I made that were absolutely great. A tractor is an amazing tool. I got the perfectly sized tractor for me, about 32 horsepower. I invested in a chainsaw or 2. Those were great investments, and all the auxiliary stuff, safety chaps, etc. There are other investments that I made that weren't wasted, but the ROI on them is not as high as I might have hoped. So, we bought a greenhouse kit and installed a greenhouse, and we do garden every year, but, really what a greenhouse buys you is maybe an extra 3 or 4 weeks in the spring and 3 or 4 weeks in the fall. And so if you're absolutely trying to maximize output, or you're trying to get food earlier in the season, that is a great tool. But on the other hand, if you are, you enjoy gardening, you do some of it, but you're not striving to get that sort of second planting. You're not striving to get chives, extra early in the spring. I'm not sure that that is a project that I would prioritize or do over. And, I suppose there were few or no huge mistakes where, oh gosh, I spent $10,000 on something that's entirely wasted. There was a lot more sort of doing things a little bit out of order, putting in fencing and gates, and then only realizing later, oh gosh, I wish I had put in a second gate here. I'll go back and do that now. And, I could have saved myself a little time and effort if I'd done it up front. And I think that by doing research, and not just my own book, there's a ton of great books out there. You can get a feel for this, but also to some degree, everyone is going to make some small mistakes. But that's not terrible. That's sort of evolutionary learning, where you're only really going to get the information you need by contact with the enemy, so to speak.
Well, thank you very much, Travis. It's been great talking with you today. And
great talking with you.
For more of these type of videos, check back on our channel. Coming soon. Thank you very much. Have a great day.